What's up guys, it's Manga time once again. I'm here today to bring you my review of Bleach 646 The Second Eye. Before we begin, I just want to say thanks to those of you who checked out my vlog channel last week, Tomo2304. And if you haven't already, please do. I'm going to leave the link in the description below and probably in an annotation somewhere. That'd be really great. Tomorrow I'm hoping going to get Battlefront beta impressions out, so if you're interested in that, then please do take a look and maybe subscribe. That'd be awesome. But getting on with the chapter review, I think this week comprised of mostly things we were expecting to happen, but just not quite yet. It actually starts off rather unexpectedly, however, with Shinji, which I wasn't expecting. And I did say a couple of weeks ago that I thought Shinji would intervene in this fight, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen at all, because Shinji is deciding to lead the charge away from Kyoraku. So Shinji basically says, okay, let's leave him to do his thing then, let's just keep going. And Momo, there's a bit of a funny moment when Momo's like, oh yeah, let's go support him. And then she's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? And then Shinji's like, oh, what are you on about? We kind of, it's a race against time right now. Is it? Because Yahava's already taken over the whole place, so technically you're just now fighting back. The time limit is over. You lost that. Your race against time was done. That was done. So I thought that was interesting that he kind of pointed that out. But I'm really interested to see what kind of role Kuba has planned for Shinji, because Shinji still hasn't really had a proper fight in this series at all. And yeah, he's kept him around, obviously for a reason, so it'll be interesting to see if he does get a proper fight. I really thought he'd fight Lil Barrow, but obviously not. And so Shinji says, well, what do you think, Nanao? And Nanao says that I'll go back myself, everyone else should go on. So Nanao is presumably going to show up at some point during Shinsui's fight. Shinji, however, says, if Ukitake were here, what do you think he would say? And everyone kind of, looks on. I like that there's a focus on Rukia, because obviously Ukitake is her captain, and so it means more to her. We then get a little panel of if Ukitake were there, which I think is quite interesting. He's like, if that's what Kyoraku said, then I'm sure he'll be fine. Let's leave this in his hands. And so I like that Shinji considers what Ukitake says. I tell you something that I found quite interesting though, is they clearly don't see Shunsui on the same level as Yamamoto, and I'm still not even sure they really consider Shunsui their captain commander as such, because if it was Yamamoto, they'll be like, oh crap, Yamamoto, he can handle this. But with Shunsui, they're questioning whether they should leave him to the enemy. Bearing in mind, this isn't even Wahrwelt, this is just one of the Sternritter. So, Shinji says, let's get a move on. And it's rather interesting, because then he mentions Yamamoto. He said, if it were old man Yama staying here, he'd tell us all to get our asses moving. And obviously, everyone kind of realizes that. And I think that's quite interesting, that people don't seem to they don't quite have Shunsui in their head yet that he's the captain commander. They're still like, we need to go and help him out because he probably can't deal with this guy on his own. Whereas with Yama, they'd be like, oh yeah, he's going to kick the shit out of him probably. But I think it's interesting that you get this really cool panel of Shunsui. You can't see his eyes, but it's like, he has to take the responsibility for the lives of his soldiers. And I've seen some people complaining that as the captain commander, Shunsui shouldn't be taking on Lille. Someone else should be doing it in his place, and Shunsui should be leading the charge to fight Yahava. But I don't know about that, because we already know that Lil Barrow has taken out, at least like 4 of their guys, if not more than that. So Shinsui's like, this has to stop, and I'll take it upon myself to take this guy out so that you can continue on safely. And Shinji says that's what it means to be the captain commander, to shoulder the lives of everyone. So he's protecting everybody at this point from Lil so they can move on. And I think that's quite cool, actually. I like that. There's then a really nice panel of Lil pointing his gun at Shunsui, and it's just a really well-drawn shot. And Lil Barrow basically says, that was rather reckless. Did you assume that coming in this close would give your sword the advantage? And Shunsui says, well, yeah, I did. You've already been cut, haven't you? And that was one of those typical Bleach moments where you can only presume that Lil Barrow's been standing there for quite some time, but his sword his gun just snaps in half when Shunsui says it should. It's one of those kind of cinematic things that Bleach does quite well. But yeah, as Shunsui says, you've already been cut, haven't you? Lil's gun just snaps and then collapses to the ground. And Lil's like, oh shit. He's a little bit concerned, and Shunsui says, my intent was to actually slice your whole arm off, but I kind of was a bit merciful. Lil darts backwards, and before Shunsui can kind of do anything, he actually repairs his weapon. I think a lot of us were expecting this to happen as well, because, the Quincy are Reishi masters after all. And Lil's gun now looks a bit more like a gun. It's no longer white, it's black. And actually it's green, but now it's black, and it looks a bit more like a gun. And I can only presume this is what it looked like underneath the fur anyway. So yeah, Lil's now returned his weapon, which is apparently called Diagram. I don't think it's actually pronounced Diagram. it might be something like, I think it might be diagram, because it's German, I believe. And he says, this gun is my bow, which I think a lot of us, again, predicted. And he says, I created it from my reishi. And I really like this because Kubo starts giving us a bit more info about Lille. And Lille kind of comes across actually as one of the more traditional Quincy's, I think, after this chapter. Because he actually says, this is my bow. I created it via reishi. And a lot of the Quincy's have kind of just skipped over that sort of thing. So Shunsui says, oh, I see. So no matter how many times I slice it or break it, you'll just make another one and keep fighting. Then Shunsui says, but aren't you forgetting the rules? And he appears behind Lille again in what is actually quite a sinister panel. It's just the way Shunsui looks, kind of like, imagine the line of this camera is the panel. He's just kind of like looking really sinister, like Lille is like, he's right there, and it's actually kind of creepy. So Lille takes his eyes off the other Shunsui. I think this is how this works. He takes his eyes off the Shunsui in front of him to like go, oh crap, and see the Shunsui behind him. The one behind him tries to swipe with Katen Kyokotsu, and he says, if you take your eyes off one of them for just a moment, oh no, sorry, no, I just literally have just worked it out by seeing this panel. When Lille gets his gun cut, he takes his eyes off Shunsui and looks down at the gun. That is when the Shunsui in front of him becomes an illusion. The real Shunsui is then behind him, which now has just tried to attack him. So that's what actually happens. So if you take your eyes off Shunsui, that Shunsui becomes an illusion. That's actually really quite a powerful and quite a nasty ability. And one that Shunsui probably could have exploited a bit better, actually. I don't know why he didn't just attack him, but, whatever. So Shunsui tries to swipe at Lille, and Lille's like, after Lille kind of bounces away almost. And then Shunsui says, back when you were a kid, you must remember how the sight of your shadow would terrify you. And then we just get, honestly, one of the best panels ever. It's just fucking awesome. Lille's just standing there, and he's like looking up, and there's literally just about 4, 5, 6 Shunsuis like flying through the air towards him. And I love that they're cloaked in shadow. That just looks, that's an amazingly drawn panel. I'm gushing a bit, but that is so, so good. And it honestly looks incredible. Like, Shunsui has always been, I think I've said this before, one of the best looking characters in the series. In terms of design, he's got so many layers to him. The swords look awesome, he's incredibly dynamic looking, and frankly, it's just a brilliant, brilliant panel of him trying to come down on Lille Barra like that. And he completely catches Lille off guard. So Lille's kind of like, oh shit, and he gets like, he kind of gets like stabbed by all the Shunsuis. And then the fake ones disappear, and the real one has just got his blade through Lille's back. Lille's eye then opens, and I was a little bit surprised by this. I was like, oh, I mean, even though the fact the chapter title basically spoiled this, the second eye, I think we all guessed that Lille's eye would open at some point, and it would be the precursor to his true power activating. I wasn't expecting his eye to look normal. I did kind of think it would be messed up. But he says, oh, that's the third time. And Shunsui's like, what the hell? And Lille says, when my eyes are both open, I can use the true power of the X-axis, which I thought was interesting, because I thought he was using the true power of the X-axis when he was resurrected by the Ashvalan, but whatever. His bullets will pass through his opponent's body, but the opponent's sword passes through his body, literally, it doesn't hurt him. It doesn't do any damage to him, which is majorly OP. But, Shunsui's like, I see, so when both your eyes are open, things get really nasty. And Lille says, correct, in this moment within this world, there is no weapon that can kill me. And I think it's interesting. He says, so when I succumb to the danger of battle for a brief moment, I'm able to open my eyes. And it's interesting because the panels they show, where Shunsui appears behind him with Daruma ga Koronda, and when he then appears behind him again using a shadow, Lille's eyes are definitely closed. The second eye is definitely closed. So I thought that was interesting. I have to admit, I do find this bit a bit confusing. Lille says that when he succumbs to the danger of battle, he's able to open both eyes. Fair enough. That would explain why Kubo shows those two older panels. What Lille's saying is that when he's in danger, it gives him the ability to open his eye. However, he then says, once he's opened his eye for a third time, but he hasn't. This is the first time. So that really doesn't make much sense to me. I do like how Shunsui, however, says, oh, well, how about you hurry up and close your eye again then? Because that's just kind of Shunsui's funny way of doing things. And so Lille says he's able to complete the fight with his eye open. And Lille then gives us very interesting bits of information about himself. He was the final Quincy to be granted power by Wahrwelt, which is really interesting. So he was literally presumably the last Sturmritter to join. And And apparently, according to Lille, anyway, he's His Majesty's greatest creation. Purely based on shonen storytelling logic, however, Lille is not the most powerful storymotor. That either goes to Gerard, Askin, or Hashwolf. However, I think Lille's a bit egotistical anyway. However, he then says, I'm much more than a man on the outskirts of being a god. That's a cool line. In Manga Panda, he says something along the lines of, I'm the man closest to God, which again is a cool line. But yeah, he's clearly a bit egotistical. We still kind of need to know more about what he's talking about here. And I really hope we get a flashback. I think we will, because I feel like this is Kubo's way of leading into one later on. Maybe I'm just being optimistic. But I think it's interesting how Kubo does kind of explain what he's talking about in this last panel, because Lil Barrow says, for this godlike creation, get him, he says, to have his eye opened after being put in a vulnerable state 3 times. So we can take from that it does presumably mean once he's in danger 3 times, his eye can finally open. He says that's the one thing that should never be allowed to happen. There's a really cool panel where his eye just kind of gleams, and like the tattoo just kind of like lifts off and becomes a light. I know it's freaking, and it actually looks really cool. But yeah, he looks awesome. I think he looks cool. And I wasn't expecting a Vollständig already. The light starts to spin around like crazy, crazy fast and creates an enormous Quincy cross. And then you get to see a little glimpse of Lille's Vollständig. Obviously both his eyes are showing. He's got white lines down his face. The smoke clears and you see his Vollständig. And on Manga Stream it's called Zyreal, which is God's judgment, or the judgment of God. And on the Manga Panda, it was Giliel, and I think Zyreal is probably the closest one that's correct. Honestly, he looks kind of cool, kind of weird. Was never really expecting this. He's like in some kind of strange pod, where his head is like sunken in. He's got a huge halo and massive, massive seraphim-style wings, each with a bunch of holes in them. And he looks cool, actually. His design is unique. He looks like a boss from a video game. But yeah, he looks cool, and I like this because everyone thought that when he got Auschwald and they had the feathery wings, that was their Vollständig. And I thought it as well. But clearly it wasn't, or at least it was some early stage Vollständig. So I'm really holding out a lot of hope that Gerard and Askin have their own fancy Vollständigs as well. That would be freaking awesome. And I think it's probably quite likely. Pernida was a different one because Pernida's freaking weird. So we'll see what happens with the other elites. But I hope they get as good a treatment as the first 2 have so far. But yeah, and Kubo's system for giving characters Vollständigs is still fucking random. I don't get it. This is like the 6th one that's been named, and the 6th one that's actually the 4th one or 5th one that's actually looked unique. So, no idea what's going on there. Anyway, Shunsui tries to move, but he finds out that he's actually frozen. He's rendered immobile, which is crazy. One of Lille's wings then lights up, and he blasts Shunsui 3 times with the holes. So he's able to fire, I think it's like 24 of these things if you go off the numbers, or go off the holes in his wings. And so Shunsui gets blasted, and that's the end of the chapter. Shunsui obviously not looking like he's in a great position here. Although Lille's attacks don't appear to have necessarily hit him in particularly bad places. One appears to have got him in the shoulder, the worst one probably in the side here, and then one just has hit his hat for some reason. I don't know why it's hit his hat. But it's a cool and dynamic final page, and it's pretty epic, and that's the end of the chapter. So will Shunsui be pushed to Bankai? That's the question on everyone's lips here, and my answer is yeah, probably. I wasn't expecting a Bankai in this fight. Well, I thought it could kind of go either way, and now I'm thinking it could happen because Lille's Vollständig appears to be very, very powerful. He's got 24 X-axis, which can just burst through anything, and apparently he can no longer be hurt, which is mental. So it's going to be kind of crazy to see what Shunsui pulls out the bag here. Obviously, Shunsui hasn't even used half of the games he used against Stark yet, but that's where the interesting part comes in. What's Shunsui's Kata and Kyokotsu got to kind of show off? So yeah, I'm super, super hyped actually for next week. It's going to be really good. I love that Lille has a unique Vollständig. Thank God for Kubo doing that, and I hope he does that for the other elites as well. But so far, this fight continues to be really interesting. It's faster paced than the Miuri fight, which is good. I also think it'll probably be over faster than the Pernida fight as well. I think we might get 6-7 chapters out of this fight. Kind of depends if Kyoraku does go Bankai, which if he does, I think it'll be the end of next week when Zyreal proves to be way too powerful for him. Then I think we'll get maybe a whole couple of chapters for Kyoraku's Bankai. I don't know, we'll see. It's interesting either way. But guys, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this week's chapter. I'm going to drop a 4 out of 5 on it. I was sitting there going, that's cool. I wasn't expecting that. So I really liked it. But let me know what you thought of the week's chapter in the comments below, and I'd really appreciate it. Do you like Lille's Vollständig, and do you think Kyoraku's going Bankai? Until next time, though, guys, see you later.